right, you should be good. You're good.
Should we start again?
Should I restart?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Before I open the hearing for the Barnstable Conservation Commission, I would like to ask George to do a roll call for the quorum purpose.
Abadili?
Present.
Foster?
Present.
Gilmore present. Hearn?
Present.
Lee?
Present.
Moran?
Present.
Nampu is currently absent. Administrator Darcy Carley?
Present.
Staff member Kim Kavanaugh?
Present.
Agent Ed Hoops?
Present.
And Assistant MLS Singh?
I don't have audio.
Emil doesn't have audio, but he is present.
We have a quorum. We're all set to go, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Under the provisions of General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, and or Chapter 237 of the Code of Town of Barnstable, the Barnstable Conservation Commission will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, January the 10th, 2023 at 3 p.m. on the applications of Thomas J. Shields, Town of Barnstable, DBW, Jonathan Jacobson, and Donna Mathias, Shawn D. Martin, Trustee. The hearing will be held remotely as televised on Channel 18. The plans and application are on file and may be reviewed by scheduling appointments by sending email requests to Darcy Curley at 230 South Street, Hyannis. This meeting is being recorded and transmitted by the Information Technology Department of the Town of Barnstable on Channel 18. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, anyone else desiring to make such a recording or transmissions, please let Channel 18 know I know. Hearing none. This afternoon's hearing agenda is posted on the town's website. On the agenda next to each application is the amount owed to the Town of Barnstable for the cost of advertising. Please send your checks to Conservation Division at 230 South Street before the hearing. Remote participations. The Conservation Commission's public hearing will be held by remote participation as a result of an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed by the Lieutenant Governor on July 16, 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. Remote public access to this hearing shall be provided in the following manner. 1, the hearing will be televised via Channel 18. Second, the real-time public comment can be addressed to the Conservation Commission utilizing the Zoom link 880-7948-3438 or use the toll-free phone number 888-475-4499 as shown on the agenda. Third, the public can also email the comments to darcy.curley@town.barnstable.ma.us at least 8 hours prior to the hearing. There's 2 items I want to mention. That first one is starting from this afternoon hearing in 2023, you will notice that on the agenda, we don't have a 4:30 sections because we are kind of streamlining the hearing schedule so that we start from 3 and then we go for an enforcement order and then we don't need to take a break to wait until 4:30 if we don't have that much item going on under the first section. So this is a change from 2023. Also, starting from 2023, with the help of the Assistant Town Attorney, Kay Conley, we have created a new WC form for the waiver and the continuance forms. This means that all the waiver for 21 days rule and the continuance must be signed by the homeowner or his or her legal representative on the WC form, which is the form is available on the Conservation Division's website. This afternoon, we have one enforcement order. Ram Robert and Lisa C. Walters, 38 Washington Avenue, Osterville, map 162, parcel 002, alteration of the buffer to the wetland resource area, Crystal Lake and bordering vegetated wetland by maintaining unpermitted beach, tabled from December the 13th, 2022. The attorney representing the homeowner is not available for this meeting. So I will table this item into February the 7th, 2023. The next item is the warning letter. Brandon Perry, 105 Stirling Road, Hyannis, maps 268, parcel 164, unpermitted tree cutting in the 50 to 100 foot buffer to a wetland resource area. ordering vegetative wetland. Ed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's not much to add to that. This was as part of the homeowner was trying to do a solar rooftop solar installation, and his solar installer had given him some poor advice, and the person went ahead and cut a tree down that was required to be removed as part of to make the installation efficient. So he just had he didn't realize he needed a permit. We have talked to the both the solar contractor as well as the homeowner, and so they are all aware of everything, as well as, and we've also talked to the tree guy who took the tree down. Again, this was done at just outside the 50th, and I've asked that they replace with native trees the same amount, so that they will be doing that this spring. Thank you,
Ed. We have 2 easy certificates. First one is Scott and Margaret Clay, SE3-5847. The second is Stephen Cohen, SE3-5850. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Moran.
Aye.
That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Amber from the town of Barnstable has DPW has another engagement after this hearing, so she'd like to move it up. So I'm take this out of order. We're going to the continuance first.
Is that legal?
Town of Barnstable DPW phosphorus inactivation using alum applied at a not to exceed the dosage of 13.5 gram per meter square to depths greater than 8 meters to Suitable Pond, Marstons Mill. This is continuing from December the 13th, and at that time is without testimony. So the quorum is every commissioner. Amber?
Tom, excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah.
Considering this was not, I hate to be a pest, but considering this was not advertised until the 4:30 hearing, can we legitimately legally open this since the abutter notification setter went out, or the ad went out for 4:30? I mean, I'm okay with it, but I just wanted to raise that issue. That's all. And I don't know, I don't have an answer to it. So maybe Darcy or does, or somebody can answer it.
It wasn't advertised for 4:30. We just stated it was going to be continued to January 10th.
Okay. But it's on the 4:30 agenda, right?
No,
we don't.
We start, our agenda say that starts at 3 o'clock. We no longer have the 4:30 start.
So that change is already in effect. I guess I didn't realize that.
yes.
That's why I mentioned from the beginning of the hearing that we are changing the agenda slightly. There's no second session in terms of the 4:30 ones.
So from now on, all of our meetings will full and complete starting, well, every other Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and there'll be NOIs, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Yes. And it's on the hearing deadline schedule and everything.
Okay. I assume Peter will object to that, but I don't know.
No, I talked to Peter already.
Okay. I'm sorry for interrupting then. Thank you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Amber, go ahead.
Thank you, Tom, and other commissioners. Glad to be with you today. My name is Amber Unruh. I work for the Town of Barnstable Department of Public Works. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Special Projects. And as Tom stated, I'm here presenting the Suitable Pond Phosphorus Inactivation Notice of Intent. I'm going to share my screen real quick so I can put up an image of Suitable Pond as we go over this. So Suitable Pond is a great pond. It's over 10 acres. It's roughly 55 acres in size. It's also a kettle hole pond. It's very deep with a maximum depth of roughly 13.1 meters of depth in the deepest locations of the pond. This map here is actually a bathymetric map, so the darker blue areas are showing you the shallower areas, with the lightest colors being the deepest areas. Around this pond, there's actually several public access points and homes and residents who live around the pond, but no docks. No docks are on this pond. So basically, homes surround the pond in various places with a beach located on the north side of the pond, kind of near Willimantic Drive, another beach near Lakeshore Drive or Lakeside Drive to the west, and then on the south there's the Fair Acres Day School. They also have a beach at that location. On any particular day, you might find fishermen here. It is a cold water fishery that's stocked with trout every spring and fall. And, you know, there are a lot of people who use this pond for recreation. Starting a couple of years ago, this pond actually started to become plagued with cyanobacteria blooms, with, you know, in particular, fairly large lake-wide blooms occurring in October of 2018. But nonetheless, even the threat of cyanobacteria blooms have impacted the ability to use this pond for the past several summers. So understanding that there was an issue at the pond, the town's Department of Public Works decided to initiate a study with the Coastal Systems Program at the School for Marine Science and Technology to have them evaluate the pond in detail through water quality monitoring analysis, collection of sediment cores, evaluation of the watershed, to understand what the inputs of nutrients are to Schuylkill Pond and how that affects the water quality, and then also develop a management plan to address those water quality issues. And in summary, what that report found was that management of phosphorus inputs to Schuylkill Pond is going to be important for managing water quality in this pond. The largest sources of phosphorus inputs to Schuylkill Pond are from the septic systems that are in the contributing watershed. So although this map doesn't show you the groundwater areas, we did learn over the course of the study that groundwater in this area is actually divided somewhere in this area, with the groundwater inputs largely coming from the north side of the pond and a little bit from the west side of the pond. Groundwater in the Lakeside Drive area is actively being studied through a study that the EPA and USGS is conducting over here with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, and that water is actually moving away from Schuylkill Pond towards the Three Bays Estuary, at least for the period of this study. And so that information was taken into consideration. So the septic systems located around Schuylkill Pond, particularly on the north side and western sides, those are the ones that are contributing phosphorus to Schuylkill Pond. The second largest source was from the sediments that are within Schuylkill Pond. As I mentioned before, it's a deep pond. It does thermally stratify over the course of the summer, and as a result, there's a loss of oxygen in the deep waters of Schuylkill Pond, which results in a release of phosphorus from those sediments into the water column, which has the potential to provide phosphorus to cyanobacteria for blooms. And then third, there are some stormwater inputs around this pond. They're a much smaller portion of the phosphorus load to the pond, but nonetheless, they are still contributing some phosphorus to the pond. So taking into consideration all of those sources, the management plan for this site is to first control the septic systems. And the town has a plan to do that through sewering, but that's not anticipated until years 20 to 30, 10 to 20. It's been advanced into phase 2 of the sewer project. So that's still over 10 years away before sewer would reach those homes that are contributing phosphorus to Schuylkill Pond. So in the meantime, the things that we can control are the phosphorus load coming from the sediments and stormwater inputs. For the purposes of today's NOI, we're requesting the permission to apply alum to Schuylkill Pond sediments that are at 8 meters or deeper in depth. So this red line here roughly delineates the 8-meter contour in the pond, and everything within that in these lighter shades of blue would be the area where the alum would be applied at an approximate dosage of 13.5 grams per meter squared throughout this area to control the amount of phosphorus that's released from those sediments under anoxic conditions. The town also plans to move forward with stormwater improvements at this site, but that'll be pursued on a different track from this request today. In the project narrative I supplied to you all, I did provide a list of suggested special conditions. Those special conditions are based on what was previously included in the alum application permits for Mystic Lake, Lovels Pond, and Hamlin Pond. And so just to cover those really quickly, what I suggested, if they may come up for discussion today, was the alum dose is not to exceed 13.5 grams per meter squared in the target area of the sediments that are at 8 meters or deeper depths. The alum treatment shall be conducted by a competent and experienced professional as approved by the conservation agent. During the alum application, we will have monitoring of pH levels in Schuylkill Pond, which will be monitored both before, during, and after the treatment or treatments if it takes multiple days. So basically, they'll monitor the pH every 2 hours, and if there are, and also look for signs of stress biota during that period. If the pH levels deviate outside of the acceptable range of 6 to 8, then the treatment will stop until those levels return to an acceptable range. The monitoring of pH shall be conducted by the applicator or other competent individual as approved by the conservation agent. In addition, daily after each application, a visual inspection of the application area and surrounding area must be conducted by a competent professional to look for harm to fish. If any more than 50 fish are observed dead, then it needs to be that the Division of Fish and Wildlife are contacted and that no further application occur. The treatment shall not proceed if the water temperatures fall below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or if the winds are in excess of 20 miles per hour. We also plan to conduct monitoring after this treatment for all of 2023 and 2024, monthly between April and October for total phosphorus, orthophosphate, total nitrogen, pH alkalinity, Secchi depth, dissolved oxygen profiles, and then we'll package all that information together in a report and provide it to the commission in 2025. And so that concludes my description of the project, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. I also have Ed Eichner here with me today to answer any questions that you may have about the study or otherwise. And thank you.
Thank you, Amber. A couple of things. One, there is a support letter by Paul Kelly and Diane Blair. And then secondly, Amber, we still don't have the DEP number, correct?
I haven't seen one, no.
So, even if we approve it, we may have to do a continuance waiting for the DEP to issue the numbers for that. Okay. Question from the commissioner. Bill?
Yeah, I am supportive of this project, but I have one question, but let me give you a little background. Amber, as you know, Indian Pond Association has had some successful alum treatments in Mystic and Hamlin Pond. And Ken Wagner was Dr. Ken Wagner was the guy who was basically heading up those previous treatments. And this fall, I had a conversation with him. A couple of us from the Indian Pond, we're, as you know, Amber, we're forever banging the drum trying to get an alum treatment over on Mystic. And so we were talking to him about, okay, how much would you really need? How much alum for costing purposes and whatnot? And he was saying that you'd need 50 grams per square meter. And then he kind of shifts around. He goes, well, it could be 25 to 50, it all depends, but I guess earlier on, he had a recommendation of 75 grams per meter originally, and that was turned down by the Natural Heritage Program or whatnot. And so when I think about 75 grams per meter, and I think about 50 grams per meter, and it's 25 to 50, I look at your 13.2, and I'm thinking, well, I don't have a problem. I think it's a good thing to do this, but is this going to require maybe multiple treatments?
Thank you for the question, Bill. So Ed, I might actually turn it over to you since you did the numbers to kind of calculate what the dosage per alum would be in the pond. Maybe you can shed some light on this.
Sure. Just by way of introduction, I'm Ed Eichner from TMDL Solutions. Working with the Coastal Systems Program, we put together the management plan. The 13.5 is based on what we measured in both the water column coming out of the sediments, as well as what we measured when we incubated the sediments to look at how much phosphorus came out. I know, and I've had conversations with Ken in the past, Ken tends to be a little bit more conservative, I think, in terms of how you go about doing alum applications. So sometimes I think he applies a lot more just to make sure that it works the way he wants it to. That said, this is an application in a system where the sediments are not the primary source of phosphorus to the water column. So what we're trying to do in this, what Amber's trying to do in this is get to the point where it's not getting worse while they are trying to figure out what they're going to do about the wastewater, which is the primary source that's coming from the watershed. So it's going to be one of those things that's going to require active management. And that's part of why Amber's proposing a monitoring program that goes with this to sort of see how, what the benefits are of the application and how long it's going to last, given that the sediments are only, 25% or so of the overall budget, phosphorus budget for this pond.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so the follow-up monitoring for the program, yeah, we intend to be as an adaptive management monitoring. So if, hopefully it's not less than 2 years and we need to go back with another alum treatment, we're hoping to get more life out of it, greater than 5 years. But nonetheless, we do want to continue to monitor Shubal Pond over the next 10 plus years before the sewer is able to arrive in this area to understand if we need to come back with another alum treatment to manage those sediments for the time being.
Thanks, Amber. Bill, does Amber answer your questions?
Yeah, I a question for Ed. Ed, something that you said was that you measured the amount of phosphorus that's in the sediment. I'm wondering if a previous analysis by Ken Wagner over on Mystic Lake, is it possible to calculate how much phosphorus is in the sediment? And might it be that, for example, Mystic Lake might have a higher load, thus the higher recommendation?
Yes, it's within the realm of possibilities. In those ponds, the primary source of what you see in the water column is coming out of the sediments, as opposed to this pond where the primary source is coming from the watershed. So that kind of difference will differ. It will change the way you want to look at management in terms of what's going on in the pond. There's been a lot of discussion about potential low-dose applications of alum in other places off Cape, in large part because of the issues about figuring out what you're going to do with the watershed. It's going to take a while, and that's exactly what this case is.
Thank you.
John?
You're muted.
Oh, John, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Isn't Shubal where Z. Crocker was doing a lot of those testings of the new systems? And he seemed to indicate that there had been a significant improvement in the pond Oh, no, no, that's not correct. A significant improvement in the amount of phosphate and nitrogen going into the ponds as a result of these systems. So I guess, Amber, is the town working with Zenit? Because, alum is, you said the program is designed to kind of stabilize the amount of alum, not correct it until we figure out where it's coming from, which is the septic system. So are we working with Parker on those septic systems? And where does that stand?
Yes, so we are, not directly working with him, but we do participate in his meetings so that we can stay up to date on those septic systems and their study. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick to show you again kind of where the groundwater is moving in that area and what they've found as part of their study. So here's a better picture. Right now, Z. Crocker's study is going on in this area adjacent to Shubal Pond. They thought that the groundwater in this area was going to be moving towards Shubal Pond based on previous models of groundwater models. But the active study actually found that the groundwater in this area is moving away from Shubal Pond. So those systems, irregardless of their phosphorus removal, nitrogen removal, has no impact on Shubal Pond as right now.
Wow. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of devastating because I think, right, Bill and George, we were sort of hoping that we would follow that, we'd see the necessary improvement, and then maybe even go to the point of requiring those at some point in time. I guess we've lost something here from a study point of view.
Well, they're still studying those systems for the nutrient removal, so that will be something we can learn from. They're still looking at the overall area and for a measurable reduction in nutrients within the groundwater in the flow path that it's moving. It just happens it's not moving towards Shubal Pond. So they're still trying to answer those questions, but relative to Shubal Pond and the impact on Shubal Pond, it's pretty minimal.
So it's not going to help Shubal Pond?
No, because the groundwater is not moving towards Shubal Pond.
Well, okay.
John, one thing you should remember though, Amber kind of in the beginning in her introductions talking about this project, in the Shubal Pond area on where you have the the nitro system installed on the southwest side. Okay, so the groundwater is moving away from the pond, but then on the north and the east side of the Shubal Pond, the septic system is going into the pond.
Yeah.
So you lighten up the low a little bit, but not completely. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was surprised because I remember when I was with Hyannis for the presentation, he was saying, we're going to be measuring Shubal Pond and the phosphates and nitrogen levels of Sarodic to see what kind of impact it has, but apparently that measurement isn't going to do much now. It's just a change from what I thought was going on there.
Right, but I also heard it from from Zeke is that from the EPA monitoring the groundwater flow is definitely away from the southern edge.
Yeah. Okay.
Nitro system is. Griffin, want to say something? Griffin?
Thank you, Tom. Griffin Bowden, town engineer. I just wanted to add one thing to this conversation. One thing to acknowledge is the nitro systems that were being installed by Barnstable Clean Water Coalition are after nitrogen. They're not after phosphorus, and the limiting nutrient that's been identified in the pond is phosphorus. And that's really what we're after here. So regardless of the flow direction of the groundwater relative to the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition study, it really wasn't the goal to remove phosphorus from that study. It really is the goal to remove nitrogen. And so that's something that's still happening there. It just happens to be flowing in a different direction than was anticipated. And frankly, that's still helping the end goal, which is removing nitrogen from the coastal watersheds. So there's still good work happening there, certainly. And it's advancing the path of getting these IA systems approved for general use by DEP. So it's not a lost cause by any means. Just want to point that out.
Somebody can educate me, because Bill probably already knows this, but relative to the cyanobacteria growth that we're seeing in Shubal, so what we're saying is that that's really caused by phosphate being introduced to it, not nitrogen. Is that correct?
Yep. Yes.
You're
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, all right. I thought it was a combination of both, but that's my ignorance, Bill.
No, usually for the freshwater pond is a phosphorus rather than
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that help.
Louise.
Yeah, I just was going to say the IA systems don't really deal with phosphorus. It's only nitrogen. But also, I think if possible, using this treatment in a relatively cut as opposed to, amping up the amount. I would rather see something happen at lower levels more conservatively if possible. So I think that this approach is a desirable one.
Thanks, Louise. Larry?
Thank you. I'd like this question to go to both Amber and Griffin because they seem to have a good handle on Z. Crocker's project. From my discussions with Z and my other discussions with other people on the southwest side of Shubal Pond, his study was focused on that area because those were the people that, first of all, he could set up shop there, and second, they were more willing or receptive to the idea rather than the people on the north side. They weren't opposed to it, they just didn't buy into it. Is that fair to say from your knowledge, or is it not true? If it's not true, that's fine, but I just wondered if the significance of Z's efforts was concentrated based upon parties that were eager to participate or not. You have that knowledge. Too bad he's not here, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, Larry. So I don't want to speak for Z by any means, and I'm going to try to avoid doing so.
Well, I'm not asking you to, so.
Yeah, and obviously he was looking for willing participants when he was kind of soliciting the program, right? I think there was hope that there would be ancillary benefits to Shubal Pond as part of that effort. But the end goal really of that effort was to study those septic systems and get them closer to general use,
okay.
Which that program is still doing.
Okay.
Shubal Pond Impacts, I think, was a hope to be ancillary benefits to that program. And it's ironic that the program is actually finding that the groundwater is actually flowing in a different direction. So that's how I can answer that question.
If we just turn the map upside down, it'll probably be okay, right?
If only it worked that way, right?
Are you all set, Larry?
Fine.
Any other question from the commissioner?
I would just like to acknowledge that Pete has joined the group. Welcome, Pete.
Good day. Do you have any comment, Pete?
No, I didn't get enough of the background, but I do know that in the past, Shubal has benefited from alum treatment in its bottom waters dissolved oxygen concentrations, and has made it a state prized fishery for its cold water fishes, primarily trout.
Okay, thank you. If there is no other comment, Channel 18, any public comment on this?
I don't believe so. Is there anybody here for public comment? If now is the time to speak. Not hearing any.
Amber, if we have to do a continuance, waiting for the DEP number, is January 17th good for you?
Did you say 17th?
Yes.
Yes, that works for me.
If we approve it on the continue with the 17th, can you sign the WC form to the office?
Yes.
Darcy, are you good with those special conditions?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Could I have a motion to approve this project as submitted with those special conditions mentioned by Amber? But we'll need a continuance to January the 17th, waiting for the issuance of the DEP number.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Moran.
Aye.
Sampu.
Abstain, since I wasn't here for the full meeting.
Yep, thank you, Pete.
So Todd, just to summarize, this is approved, and the only reason it's on a continuance to the 17th is for the DEP number only. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. We have one RDA for this afternoon. Is Thomas J. Shields to permit a view corridor at 158 Great Bay Road, Osterville, shown on the assessors map 072, parcel 032001. John?
Good afternoon, John O'Day from Sullivan Engineering. I'm representing the applicants, the Shields. It's a property on Little Island in Osterville. It came to us as a result of the homeowners had reached out to conservation staff directly about some trees that were in the vicinity of their house, and at a meeting on site with the meal, I believe, there was discussions about this vista corridor out back and how it has not been historically permitted, and they were directed to file a request for determination. And so they reached out to us, and we've hopefully helped them put that paperwork together and before you this afternoon. So again, this is a house on Little Island. This is Bridge Street. This is the causeway out to Oyster Harbors. It's kind of a unique property in that it actually owns almost the whole southern tip of the cove here, wraps around about 1,000 feet of the shoreline. There's an existing sunroom off the back of the house, and there is obviously historically been a vista corridor maintained out there, and we are seeking to legitimize that work, I guess. We're requesting to be able to maintain some of that understory at a undulating height of 4 to 8 feet. And I think that this is consistent with how the commission has handled some of these other long-standing vistas, where there's a little bit of a slope there. We think that we can, I think we've had some in the past that were 4 to 6 feet. I think we can even go up to 8 with some of this vegetation and kind of maintain that natural understory in this low corridor. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Louise?
When the applicants meet with Emil, it's really important to get that undulating feature of the corridor established. When I was there, I noticed that the right, as you're facing the resource area, basically half of the right-hand part of the corridor is, there are scrub oaks that have been obviously topped. And so we need to stop that and get that undulation that we're looking for.
Thanks, Louise. Is there any other question from the commissioner? Pete?
Yeah, I'd like to second Louise's emphasis as to the, well, quite frankly, the ugliness of topping. It does not benefit the homeowner. You end up getting a surge of small branches coming up from whatever's topped. I think there are much better ways to get an undulation, but certainly topping is not something we want to see. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Pete. Any other question from the commissioner? Channel 18, any public comment on this? Channel 18?
I think he must be in the other room, Tom. I don't even see him on the screen. There he is.
Yeah. Ken 18, is there any public comment on this? Assuming it's none. So John, so this is a standard vista pruning, and make sure that you have that 4 to 8 various heights, undulating height. And so consult it with Emil before you do anything on this one.
So just so understand that the trees will be standard vista pruning. The understory may continue to be managed, but extra emphasis on the undulation, not a straight haircut.
Thank you, John. Could I have a motion to approve this project as a negative determination?
So, second.
Roll call.
Sampu,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Hearn,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Abadili,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Good luck, John. We're starting with, we are going into the NOIs. The first one is Town of Barnstable, DBW. The existing wastewater pump stations at 720 Main Street will be removed and the new stations will be constructed at 725 Main Street as shown on the assessors maps 308 parcel 003 and 143. Griffin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to give just a very quick overview and then turn it over to Environmental Partners Group, who is the consultant for this project. So again, thank you, Tom, and members of the commission. I'm Griffin Bowden, the town engineer for the town of Barnstable here. Again, giving an overview for this important infrastructure project for the town. Back in 2019, the Department of Public Works prepared a pump station asset management plan, which studied all of the town's sewer pump stations, the 27 sewer pump stations that are in the existing sewer collection system, and made recommendations for improvements to these stations. The existing pump station at 720 Main Street was identified as one of the stations requiring critical upgrades and improvements. In fact, it was identified as being undersized and beyond its useful life. At the same time, there was a identified capacity concern within the sewers located on South Street, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from 720 Main Street. Through those sewers, that sewer restriction was really restricting growth in the downtown Hyannis growth incentive zone, which obviously is an important area to have adequate infrastructure for the community. Through a multi-year planning process, we've come up with a proposal to decommission the 720 Main Street pump station and build a new state-of-the-art pump station at 725 Main Street, which will address the capacity concerns at the existing station, but also alleviate some of the capacity concerns that we had on South Street, thereby allowing for further growth within the downtown Hyannis growth incentive zone. So that's a little background on the project, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ziad Carey from Environmental Partners, who will go into more detail on what I just gave an overview on. Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
Griffin, good afternoon. So with me, I'm with Environmental Partners Group, Ziad Carey here. And I have Kate Rusa and Francesca Barilla. They're on the call as well, and they'll be fielding questions at the end of this. We put together a short presentation, basically trying to summarize what we're looking to do. And in this presentation, Griffin just gave you part of this background. We'll talk about the site description. We discussed the need for the project, obviously, based on Griffin's opening statement here. We'll show the site civil layout and the architectural, what the station is going to look like. There is a stormwater management plan. There's some dewatering based on construction. We'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. The erosion control mitigation, and we'll take your questions towards the end. So just to put things in perspective, this is the current, I don't know if you could see my screen here, maybe a little bit small, but The 720 Main Street pump station is located here at this corner, and the proposed pump station is located here, a town-owned parcel. It's about 1.3 acres. This, by the way, was a former gas station that operated sometimes between 1937 and the late 80s. There were a couple of RTNs, track and release numbers, and DEP sites. Studies were conducted early 2000 and then 2007. And at the conclusion of this, the site was closed. There was some underground water storage tanks. They did some soil and groundwater sampling, and they concluded that the site is closed and ready for development. In the contract document, we have a contingency for contaminated soil if they're encountered on the site, so they could dispose. They could, the contractor will have to stockpile them, protect them, and dispose of them in the proper fashion. This is the open space at 725 Main Street. As you could see, because of the open space requirements, we limited to 2 easements to access the station. The first one here, the one at an angle, is a utility easement. This is where we elected to put the pipes coming into the station. And the one to the right, which is almost a rectangular square perpendicular to Main Street, that is the access to the station itself. Again, the site is about 1.3 acres and abuts Paper Street here, Dumont, and a wall would have to be constructed along this side of the parcel to kind of mitigate the grade differential between where the station is going to be located and the existing grade on Dumont. This is the existing site in picture. There is a small retaining wall, there's a generator, and there's a wet well below grade at 720 Main Street. This is a look from an angle. Again, it's the station is located adjacent to an intermittent stream. Once the station the new one is constructed, commissioned, and put into service, the old station would be demolished. Anything that's above grade, all the equipment will be removed and disposed of, and then the site will be restored. The trees on the guardrail will remain. Nothing will get touched here. This is a couple photos of the current site. As I mentioned, the retaining wall. Right now, there is some sort of a part of the old parcel, the old gas station. There was a concrete retaining wall, although it's short and it's in bad shape. But that's what separates or breaks up the grade between the current location and then Dumont here to the left. Griffin did mention the intent of the project, obviously redirecting the sewer from C Street and resolve the existing sewer capacity. We talked about the grade differential requiring a retaining wall, and the proposal for this retaining wall would be in the Ready Rock wall, concrete, the block wall that would be quick and easy to install. The trees that you see up here that would have to be removed as a result of removing the foundation, and then obviously would be some fencing of some sort to separate the station from the street up here. And then at the end, there's some work that would be happening on Main Street and South Street all the way up to C Street. So there'd be some digging within the roadway, and that would be followed by restoration and roadway reconstruction. This is the site civil. So basically this shows the utilities in here. The sewer comes into the pump station, into the deep wet well, and then from the wet well gets pumped right under the wall here through Dumont and then back onto Main Street through 2 force mains. So the new 2 force mains will be installed between the station and Main Street. They'll be connected to the existing ones currently located within Main Street. The work would be happening partially within the 100-foot buffer and the 50-foot buffer. The 50-foot is labeled as the red line up here, and the 100-foot is the blue line on this figure. In terms of let me see if I could increase the visual here. In terms of the The roof runoff would be captured and would be recharged into the ground through a leaching chamber in here. And all the site improvement, this site will be paved access. So there'll be a couple catch basins collecting all the runoff, the stormwater runoff from the site, and then routing it into Coltech chambers. This is the field here for the Coltech chambers, and will be recharged into the ground. And anything that doesn't get recharged is an overflow that connects into the existing system. So some elevations at the station. What the station is a one-story building. So from the grade that we showed on 725, the first grade elevation would be the existing grade, and then the wet well would be buried below grade, goes some distance down. And these are 4 different views, and there's a rendering here that probably shows a little bit of better resolution on what the station is going to look like. This would be the view from the, if you're driving on Main Street, headed towards south, that's what the station is going to look like from one angle. If you're on Dumont, this is what you're going to see. The generator room up here on this side, and then the main level, that lower level, there's a dry pit submersible pumps, and on the opposite side, there's a wet well where the flow comes into the station. We discussed this is a stormwater management consisting of Coltech chambers, basically handling the runoff, the stormwater runoff from the site, and then the overflow goes into the existing conduit here on Main Street, and then back to the wetland. In terms of the erosion control, all the catch basins adjacent to the site and along Main Street, up all the way up to C Street, will have silt sacks in them. Groundwater during excavation is anticipated to be encountered at the depth, to install the wet well and anything that's below grade. So anything that's pumped from below grade will be going into a frac tank, and then from frac tank to secondary containment before it's being discharged. Stockpiles would be covered. It's on the contractor to find a suitable site for stockpile, and then anything that they take off the site, they take it and they stockpile it and they cover it and they protect it with hay bales and erosion control, so nothing leaches off the construction material. In terms of the schedule, so this project, the town is looking to get a contractor on board early next spring. So this is basically, we're trying to wrap up the design. Mass DEP is going to have to review the technical design document. The SRF in Boston would have to give the town permission to advertise. So the intent is to advertise sometimes this winter, and then go to construction, award the contract by spring, and then hopefully have a contractor on board by digging fall of 2023. So here today, we seek an approval for this project, and then we, just because of limitations and the site constraints, we're looking to see if we could get a waiver on the replication for wetland. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll take your questions.
I think we're still waiting for the DEP number, correct?
That is correct.
So if we approve this project, we still have to take a continuance waiting for the DEP number, just to keep you in mind.
Understood.
Question from the Commissioner, Louise.
I may have missed this, but if you go back to your plan showing the location of the project relative to the 50 and 100 foot buffers, I'm wondering, are you going to do that? Can you go back to that?
Yep.
Well, basically, my question while you're doing that is,
there it is.
You barely are touching the 50, but there's a lot going on in the 52-100, and could you move that back, shorten some of the pipes and so forth, and just move it so that it's totally out?
Move the station back, you mean?
Station?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So basically what we look to do, as we mentioned, the site is extremely tight, and we need this area here houses the generator for the site. And the generator needs some access for maintenance. And really we could barely come in, and there's a retaining wall right up here. So this retaining wall that we propose along Dumont, it's just gonna wrap around and then ends somewhere around here. So to bring it back is challenging because that would prevent us from getting access to the back of the station, more specifically the generator. And there's an odor control room on that side too. So we tried everything we can, literally, and this is really how we try to fit this station within the space that we have.
I can expand upon that just a little bit, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're working within an easement that was defined on this property, about 15 years ago or so, when the town purchased the property. So when the town purchased this property, it was purchased as open space, but with an easement underlying the open space for this future use. So there's an easement defined on the property for the construction of sewer infrastructure on this property, but it's defined in the geometry that was shown, I think, on the slide before this yet, if you can, maybe it was 2 before, but the one that shows the easement.
Yep.
Yeah, so the green boundary is obviously the full property, but there's this red easement area that had been carved out and reserved on the property for sewer construction. And you can see on this image that red area is almost entirely within buffer zones. And so what we did was we moved it as far north as we could to stay out of the 50-foot buffer to the extent we could. But we were unable to keep the infrastructure outside of the 50 to 100 because of that restriction on the property. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
As I look at your drawing, it seems like the narrow area moving from left to right. I don't understand why it couldn't be shortened, but I just have to take your word for it, I guess. I mean, it seems like it could be just split up a bit, but.
If you're looking at the drawing itself, the wall is right on top of the 50. You know, whether you put a foot or something away from that, whether that would help, and without moving your stations, I think that may do the trick.
Well, it'd be nice to get, I mean, theoretically, it would be nice to get it out of the 50 to 100 as well, but if it's not possible given space constraints, then so be it.
Right.
So we can definitely look at trying to make that adjustment in the back at the 50-foot. We can try to tighten that up a little bit to the extent possible. I don't think it's going to be, I know it's not going to be achievable to get outside of the 100-foot entirely.
No.
And you can kind of really see why with what's going on here. Some of the space that we left in the front of the building really is for access of maintenance as well. So we need to have a driveway that's big enough to have equipment turn around and park there in order to access these manholes. And then in the front, there's rectangles. That's where the sewer comes into the station, and our maintenance staff will need to be able to open those hatches and pull up a truck to it if they need to ever do maintenance on that location. So there is a little bit of what may appear to be dead space to the north of the station, but that's really what that intent was for, was because we still need to get maintenance vehicles in there.
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, Griffin, too, it's just a maintenance vehicle and potentially cranes, right? Because you have, you have pumps, and then you have some components below grade, and, this was done based on a turning radius, and, literally that's what we try to do to fit in within the space that we have, so. But if we want to, we could look into maybe pushing the wall about a foot or so we could stay away from the 50. That's something we could definitely entertain and look into.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Any other question from the commissioner?
Yes, Tom, thank you.
Darcy?
Yes, thanks. So I was wondering, as far as, could we also look at adjusting the location for the SOC, the erosion control? And we probably want to have a condition about sequencing protocol for whether the wall is going to be going in first. I just have a question about any grading there. Is there a potential that if we need to have like the work limit line checked every week, and would that be something that DPW would have somebody on site? Because I just didn't know if the wall didn't go in time, they did all the clearing and everything, that we have a potential of erosion into the 50-foot buffer.
So I could answer the first question. So basically there's a sequence of work. Obviously, there is a deep cut in here. I think the wall is probably going to be last to be handled at this point. I think the idea, the contractor would come in and they would establish the supportive excavation, because it is a deep cut and they need to, start with the concrete from the base up. And when they get up to this level and where the piping is going to have to go into the ground, I think the pipe will go in first, and then after that, the wall would come in last. There will be a time when maybe partially this would be disturbed, but on the project, there will be a full-time resident engineer that's overseeing construction. Any grades or any shots that are going to be required by the commission would be happy to take them and provide them.
Okay, great. So maybe we just want to have a special condition that make sure the work limit line gets walked after any heavy rain events.
Sure.
Excuse me, Darcy, why not require a condition upon a construction protocol being submitted and reviewed, approved by staff prior to the start of the, okay, so we can make that a condition.
The only other question that I have, just to follow up, because they are going to go to ours, to bid the project out in wintertime. And so by the time you have your contractor, the contractor should be looking at that construction protocol to confirm that and to make sure that they understand the whole, construction sequencing. So I think that would be the time that to submit the construction protocol for the staff to review.
Makes sense, huh?
Okay. Any other questions from the commissioner? I kind of took a liberty of looking at the drainage report and seems to be fine. But one of the requests I also asked the environmental partner is to conduct a hydrocat run using the NOAA plus rainfall data. And they did that this afternoon and it seems to be fine. So I'm okay with the drainage report. So if we're approving this, but we still have to need a continuance for the DEP number, Griffin, would 17 be suffice?
Sure.
Yes, that'll be fine. We'll have somebody in attendance.
Yeah, okay. Channel 18, any public comment on this?
Yes, there was someone here for public comment. So now's your time to speak.
Can you give us your name and address?
At least there was somebody here when I don't know if they're still here.
Can you go back to full screen, please?
Any public comment on this? To the Barnstable sewage lift stations?
Maybe they're not here anymore.
Okay.
If they come back for whatever reason, please feel free to share my information with them and we'll answer any questions that there are.
Okay. Could I have a motion to approve this project as submitted, subject to the submittal of the construction protocol by the contractor? And then we need a continuance date to January the 17th, waiting for the DEP to issue the numbers.
Well, there was going to be,
Sec-
wait. There was going to be an effort to move the southern part of that out of the 50-foot.
Yes, adjusting the retaining wall to be away from the 50-foot.
To the best of their ability. I mean, that's
right.
You know.
True. Yep.
And walking the work limit line after rain events, please.
And walking after the rain event, so that could be added into the construction protocol. So
moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili.
Aye.
Byrne.
Aye.
Sampu.
Aye.
Warren.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Good luck, Griffin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much and have a great evening.
Yeah,
Thank
too.
you.
The second OI is Jonathan Jacobson and Donna Mathias to repair and replace existing stairs and to construct and maintain a walkway and seasonal pier at 340 Hollidge Hill Lane, Marstons Mill, as shown on the Assessors Map 181, parcel 010. John?
Good afternoon, John O'Day from Sullivan Engineering Consulting. I'm representing the applicant's property. We are on Hollidge Hill and we are overlooking Middle Pond. I'll bring up the plan. We have an existing dwelling. There is an existing set of stairs which were constructed with an order of conditions in the late 80s. The stairs are in pretty good shape, but at some point in the near future, they will require maintenance and or replacement. And we thought that this would just be an appropriate time to include that in this filing. From the bottom of the stairs, we are requesting to construct a typical lake pier seasonal aluminum construction. We do have a little bit of a walkway that's heading towards the east so that we can maintain some separation to the property line. I know the homeowner was, passing plans back and forth with the abutter to the left to make sure we came up with something that they all felt would work well between the two properties. So this pier, it is, I think, very consistent with others on the lake. Very consistent with the Commission's guidelines for freshwater docks and piers that go back to around 2014. And I think with that, I would just be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any question from the Commissioner? Louise?
I don't have any real problem with the proposal, but if and when you replace those stairs, the lights along those stairs ought to be changed. There's a large one at the top of the stairs, I believe, and then something at the bottom. And I don't think we have a written guideline, but I think the staff will advise you in terms of how those lights should go in. They're to be kept low and at low voltage. And what you've got there now is not what we would like to see. Also, you have a canoe stored on the bank, which should not be there. So those are the two things that I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Louise. Any other questions from the Commissioner?
Excuse me, Tom.
Yeah, go ahead.
Staff does not get involved with lights on the stairs.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's my understanding, excuse me for jumping in, it's my understanding that we had the light restriction over the docks over water based a lot on what Peter had indicated is a concern with light in the habitat, shellfish habitat, fish habitat, et cetera. Whereas, isn't that right, Darcy?
She said stairs, I thought.
Right.
I'm talking about this on the stairs. I would also think let's see, I'm speaking from my experience, and when we put ours in 20 years ago, somebody gave us advice about lighting along the path and also the stairs, someone from conservation. So.
But I don't know that we have guidelines or have ever done that. Have we, Darcy?
We don't get, yeah.
So we don't care?
We don't regulate it.
We don't regulate it.
We don't have regulations and we don't have written guidelines, but.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I'm going to concur with Louise. Yes, these are not lights over the water, but going down this bank into a freshwater, a very bright light well above the surface of the ground is going to be a major attractor of emerging aquatic insects, which it's Louise, I completely agree with you. You can put lights lower to the ground, which provides the necessary lighting to be able to walk up and down the stairs in the dark. Having a large light well above the surface is detrimental to the wildlife, insects included, that would be living in that area. And I just don't see a good argument for allowing it to be there when the alternative is certainly suitable. Thank you, Louise, again.
But right now, we don't have any guideline per se. I mean, we can only ask the homeowner to look into that, to modify that. I think that's all we can do.
Well, it sounds like we don't have any place or resource offering for them to look into it, which is.
I'd be happy to pass that information along, just wherever it goes. I will make sure they are aware of some of the commissioner's concerns.
Yeah, please do, John.
So, we have mentioned the problem of light pollution. So we have talked about that along our saltwater shorelines up on terrestrial landscapes.
But we don't have it as a guideline or any kind of regulation per se, though.
Okay, so it's a recommendation, something that we perhaps should be considering as getting into some kind of protocol for us.
Right, but I mean, at this time, we don't have it, so we can only ask the homeowner to look and see whether they want to make a change of the lighting at this point. So, Larry.
It appears to me, based on what John O'Day said, this was built 35 or 40 years ago. And at that time, the lighting was different than is now provided on piers. So it would kind of be common sense that if the pier was replaced and or repaired and reconstructed, that the property owners are probably going to want an updated lighting system. And I think a recommendation to have the lighting consistent, be consistent, not overly done, would probably be sufficient. I think that the interest is not to spotlight the whole area as much as it is to walk safely up and down the pier. And I think that you got to give some common sense here to people, and I think that that's what they would do. But maybe we know people don't always abide by common sense, but at least that's the way I'm looking at it.
We're talking about the stairs.
I know, I'm too. That's exactly what I talked about.
No, Larry, I think you said pier, but I think you meant the
I meant the stairs. I'm sorry, I did. Yeah, I meant the stairs.
That's
yeah.
All right.
Anything else? Anything else from the commissioner? Channel 18, any public comment on this?
I'm not on Channel 18, but I'm the abutter to the left, Burton Rue.
What's your name?
Burton Rue, R-H-U-E. I'm on the screen.
Do you need an address, Tom?
Yes.
365 Hollidge Hill Lane. However, I own the lot across the street, which is 370 Hollidge Hill Lane, which abuts this property.
Okay. Go ahead.
My question is, I guess, more for John O'Day. John, in the plan that Mr. Jacobson showed me there was no lateral access stairs on the dock. You're now showing these on the plan that's been presented. I was concerned by 703 that the dock would approach the midpoint of their property, but we came to an agreement on the dimensions that were shown earlier. But now you've added these stairs. I'm not sure what those stairs are all about.
So this pond is a great pond. It's subject to Massachusetts Chapter 91 laws and regulations, and a requirement of the state is for public access along the shoreline to be preserved and maintained. And so they require these steps along any structure along the shoreline, so that if there was someone walking the edge of the pond, their access would not be impeded.
I happen to have a dock myself on Middle Pond, about the same style dock. And I'm familiar with the regulation you mentioned by the state. And they said as long as the individuals could get up and walk across their dock, that was acceptable without putting stairs in. I'm just concerned about getting closer to my property line. It's an undeveloped lot, but I don't know what the future use will be.
We can take a closer look at that with the homeowner, and you know, how many steps might actually be required. Is that getting closer to your property?
Yeah, you're showing 27 feet at the end. You never show the actual dimension at the corner. Further out, you show the 27 feet from the lot line, projected lot line. And you're showing high water level as you're showing it there. It appears that these steps would be in the water.
Yes, that's true.
So, John, do you need to make any adjustments in terms of the revised plan?
I think that I will let the neighbors continue to talk to each other, and I think if there's thought that the stairs should be adjusted up or down on a neighborly agreement, I would be happy to make sure those plans end up in the commission's file. But I think for our purposes, I'd be comfortable moving forward.
Okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think I can work this out with John.
Okay.
Peter.
Yeah, I think we should keep the stairs. They don't seem that far. You know, 3 steps of stairs is 4 feet maximum off the side of a pier, and longshore passing is vital for anyone who happens to be fishing from shore or possibly even bird watching. So I don't think we should forego these steps because they're over 20 feet away from the adjoining property.
But they've agreed to kind of work it out and discuss them, but I would agree with Peter.
Yeah, I would disagree with the commissioner. I'm not sure I'm using the proper title, but by 703, typically that dock would normally be at 47 feet from the lot line, which is the midpoint of that lot. So we're already about 20 feet closer to the lot line without these additional steps. Plus, if these steps are in the water, I'm not sure exactly the purpose they serve for people that are walking the shoreline that you mentioned. They should be able to walk on top of the deck, just like I'm on the opposite side of the pond here, same elevation. You just walk across the dock. It happens all the time. So yeah. I'd like to work that out with Mr. Jacobson, and perhaps we will leave them there. But it's just a surprise to me. I did not see them in the original plan that was given to me.
Yeah, let the homeowner work with burden on this one to sort it out in terms, if there is any revised plan, John can submit a revised plan on this. Is there any more public comment on this?
I don't see any more. But if anyone else is here, now's your time to speak. Don't hear any.
Hearing none.
Set.
Could I have a motion to approve this project as submitted?
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Moran.
Aye.
Sampu.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
I just have one question on that. You said as submitted. Is that assuming that those stairs are approved by the commission?
You can work out with your neighbor, and then John, if there is any revised plan to change that stairway and so forth, John can submit a revised plan.
Okay, so it's for negotiation, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, and canoe needs to get removed from the bank. John?
What does, Louise?
There's a canoe that is being stored on the bank.
I will pass along the canoe to the owner along with concerns about lights and make sure that we're closing the loop neighborly about stairs.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
The last of the NOI is Shawn D. Martin, trustee, to convert post-supported pier to pile supported pier with no change in footprint at 310 North Bay Road, Osterville, as shown in the Assessors Map 072, Parcel 005. Arlene?
Good afternoon. Arlene Wilson, AM Wilson Associates, here for the Martins. The Martin property is a 1.3-acre site, first developed for residential use in 1927. It has a single-family dwelling, which is now in the converted pool house. That happened with commission permission in the early 2000s, excuse me, when the main house burned. And permission was given at that time to rebuild the main house, but that never happened. And if it's going to happen sometime in the future, they'll have to come back as a separate new filing to do that. There's also a stone revetment that was authorized under SE 3 2700 and a 4-foot wide seasonal pier with a ramp and an 8-by-16-foot float extending 100 feet beyond what was then mean low water and authorized under SE 3 3961. The site is not restricted under the Coastal Wetlands Restriction Act, and no portion of the project area is mapped by Mass Natural Heritage. Resources at the site include the coastal bank, narrow supratidal beach and intertidal beach, land subject to coastal storm flowage, and land under the ocean and containing shellfish. The project is limited to the conversion of the pier from a post-supported structure to a permanent pile-supported structure. I would note that the existing float already is pile-supported, and the piles, although not the float, stay in the water year-round. The proposed pier would not change either the size or location of the float, nor the size or location of the ramp. Both of those things would continue to be removed from the water in the winter. There is a request from Mass Marine Fisheries to ensure that there are float stops on the pier, on the float, and we're happy to do that. The applicant wants to convert the pier so that the structure will be more stable and to reduce its environmental impacts, as well as because it's become very difficult to find contractors to service these seasonal piers. As you know, seasonal piers are installed and removed by jetting a process which causes turbidity. The installation in particular occurred during a time when shellfish larvae are setting and are most vulnerable to turbidity impacts. The DMF letter on this project cites the project area as within winter flounder habitat. Their spawning is also sensitive to turbidity issues and extends through the end of May, where the installation of seasonal piers under the town bylaw is allowed from the beginning of April. So those two things likely conflict. Converting to a permanent pier reduces that annual turbidity impact from jetting as the piles are driven into the substrate at the beginning of the project. They can utilize siltation curtains so that any turbidity caused by the construction is confined to a narrow area around the work site. And once that's over, then for the life of the piles are in place and there are no other turbidity impacts. We're happy to use PVC collars for ice control here rather than a bubbler. Bubblers also cause some turbidity impacts. We're sensitive to that and we're happy to use the alternative there. I would point out that the Commission's Regulation 703-1D, the part of the preamble that talks about turbidity impacts, cites turbidity as a concern because of the sediments smothers shellfish and diminish bottom quality. Disturbed sediments can settle into depressions and create, and I quote, highly fluid sediments which may not be able to physically support shellfish, end quote. The section goes on to say that disturbance of sediments during larval sediments hinders and or prevents effective settlement of shellfish. So that particular concern is actually cited in your own regulation. There's another interesting issue with your regulation 703 under section 2. It says that we're all required to use the August 21st, 2000 shellfish maps as we look at impacts from these piers rather than the most current one. I'm sure that's an oversight for not having changed it as the maps change, but it's something that you probably should look into in the future. I would also note that the town ordinance, chapter 237, does not include shellfish habitat as a protectable interest, only the shellfish themselves. That means that reducing turbidity impacts takes on a more important position under the ordinance, since the regulations can't increase jurisdiction beyond the four corners of the statute it implements. It also means the Commission must rely on the constraints of 13140 and 310 CMR 10.34 to protect shellfish habitat. As the Commission is aware, DEP commonly finds the conversion of seasonal piers to pile-supported piers to be acceptable under state requirements. Most recently, last August, the state allowed such a conversion in a highly ranked shellfish area at 25 Cove Lane on Oyster Harbors, not very far from the Marstons site. We put that superseding order and the accompanying plans in the record. As I noted, DMF has supplied comments for this project dated 1/6/23. There was a copy of a 9/4/2009 letter from DMF for an unrelated project at a different and distant site not relative to the Martin project put into the file. The current project specific DMF letter cites the area as habitat for shellfish, winter flounder, and as being at some distance from horseshoe crabs habitat. It provides 2 proposed special conditions to reduce potential impacts during construction. It does not cite concerns for cumulative impacts or potential increases in fouling organisms, nor does it recommend against the project. I believe the site-specific and current DMF letter is the one that should be used as relevant to this project. The applicant would be happy to comply with the DMF special conditions, as it would be happy to comply to the special conditions listed in the SOC for 25 Cove Lane. Finally, as to the issue of providing habitat for exotic non-native fouling organisms, because the pilings are CCA treated, any such growth on piles is unlikely. The float and ramp are to be removed in the winter, so any growth on them will die back and fall off in the upland storage location during that period. As I've noted previously, the studies introduced into the file by Commissioner Sampu, I believe are not comparable to this project, because not only were they not conducted in a similar geographic location or one that has similar climatic conditions, rather they're from Sydney, Australia, the Adriatic, and the coast of Belgium. But also, they're conducted in heavily industrialized harbors. This site is hardly an industrialized harbor. The Tyrell Byers study, which I included in the Martin NOI, is from Wells, Maine. It is more comparable to this site. It concludes that exotics prefer artificial surfaces, that is plastic as opposed to wood. And we've also included the entirety of the report, so anyone who would like to be able to read and discover how the study reached those conclusions is able to do that, as opposed to selecting a few limited pages from the report, which makes it difficult to follow how the conclusions were arrived at. It's my professional opinion that over the long term, pile-supported piers in suburban rather than industrialized settings have fewer adverse impacts to shellfish habitat, storm damage prevention, and related wetland interests than do seasonal docks. You've all heard me give that argument multiple times in the past. And I'm going to cut it short because of that. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
We have the DMF letter in the file that's dated January the 6th. And then we also have a copy of the shellfish report from the Natural Resource Department dated January the 6th as well. I'm just going to read the last paragraph from there. The habitat supporting an abundance of shellfish in 2002, when the original pier was proposed. Tom McCarthy's survey results attached indicated the area was good for settlements and recruitment of shellfish, and stated the importance of an area to be shell fishery. As a result, the commission saw fit to allow a pier, but to make the seasonal due in part to depressed resource and shellfish habitat. Now that a seasonal pier was granted and 20 years has passed, there has been opportunity for the area to degrade due to a wide variety of factors, not limited to the pier being in place. This pier being converted from the seasonal to permanent will set a precedent and that if an applicant get a seasonal piers and wait long enough for that pier to alter the habitat, they will then be able to come back and get a permanent pier. Natural resource cannot support these projects. Pete?
Okay, good. I'm unmuted. Just a couple questions, Arlene, as to some of your arguments. Let me see where my notes are. So let's see. In terms of jetting in, this annual jetting in of a 4-inch pile causing turbidity. And George, you might be able to answer this as well. Is this turbidity associated with putting in a seasonal dock? Does it last an hour, a day, a week, a month? Can you give me some time framework as to the local turbidity effect of putting in a number of piles on a seasonal dock? And George, you might be able to say, how long does it take to put in a seasonal dock?
Seasonal dock like this probably takes a day to 2 days, depending on the tides that they're working. The turbidity factor depends on obviously what the bottom sediments are. If they're finer, obviously got more turbidity, lasts a lot longer. They're heavier sediments, they tend to settle out rather quickly. Rather quickly.
So Arlene, can you speak at all to the grain size distribution at this area?
It's reasonably variable, Pete. I think Liz actually did a pretty good job of describing what goes on there. There are areas that are medium to large grain sands. There are some stones, small gravel size materials. There's also some organics there. The problem with the installation of the seasonal pier and the turbidity is that the holes that result from the installation of the posts in past years tend to fill up with fines. And so those fine sediments get blown away every time the pier gets installed. And they tend to stay in suspension for some time. We haven't done a study.
Okay, I will certainly be addressing the long-term impacts possibly, but let me move on here to another question from you, Ms. Wilson, and my fellow commissioners. So we as a commission are supposed to protect shellfish, but not shellfish habitat. That's not part of our purview. So the question I have, if shellfish habitat is not of concern to us, how do we expect to protect those organisms that are making use of that habitat? There seems to be a bit of an incongruence with those two statements. Arlene, your comments?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Perhaps I wasn't quite clear enough, Pete. You need to use 13140 and its regulations to protect habitat, because habitat is an interest under the state statute. It's not under yours. So you need to look to the state interests in that regard. And we know from past performance that the state does not consider conversion of a seasonal to a permanent pier to be adverse to the extent that it requires denial.
Okay, but if we in our local bylaws are to protect shellfish, I think it is only expected that we take into account the habitat in which they settle. I'm going to move on to some other things. You make mention of a more recent letter from DMF as opposed to the letter that I put into the record from 2009 from Director Diodati. And nothing was mentioned in the most recent letter to us about either exotics or cumulative effects. I think that's true, right?
Right.
Okay, so the question I have, and I'm not aware, you might be able to fill me in, has the science changed so that a concern expressed within our town, within these embayments on our south side that Director Diodati's worries about cumulative effects or the citing of exotics. Is the science changed on this? Is Director Diodati's 2009 worry completely unfounded?
I haven't discussed the issue with him, Pete. I know that the site conditions at the location for that letter are different than the site conditions at the Martin property. I suspect that DMF may have become aware of more of the studies on exotic fouling organisms since 2009. But beyond that, I cannot say why the issues weren't cited, only that they were not.
Okay, but given my professional background as a PhD in biological oceanography, I am not aware of any change in the science regarding exotics that would have our current Department of Marine Fisheries say that exotics are no longer a worry, or that the cumulative effect of multiple structures upon which exotics have a preferential, and we'll get into some evidence about, have a preferential ability for attachment compared to our natives. I'm actually going to go through a bunch of the things that I have put on and some of the things, Ms. Wilson, that you've put on. So as I mentioned, I want to point out here from Diodati's 2009, which I would claim does pertain to a wide variety of our habitats across the South Shore, not just at a specific site of a pier. What I have highlighted, and here's a quote: pilings provide structure for colonization by invasive species, as well as an increase for the potential for trash and wreck accumulation. Piles also increase the probability of intercepting ice during winter storms, causing gouging of the substrate. Extra piles and cross members create more places for ice to hang up and create scour pits. Scour pits would degrade the surface sediment. Moving on to the second latter part of this letter. Again, I'm just putting into the record, the continued proliferation of piers in Barnstable and other Cape towns could have a cumulative detrimental impact on the Commonwealth's marine resources and could, in time, result in a much diminished population of marine species in these embayments. The Commission should carefully consider the cumulative impacts this structure could have on the town's natural resources. Let me continue. The 2013 Rapid Assessment Survey of Marine Species in New England Bays and Harbors, and I will make reference to your 2018 shortly. Again, I don't want everyone to read all of it, but you certainly can. If you have an interest, I can provide all the information associated with these. I'm trying to identify the key things. The first paragraph in the introduction from, again, this 2013, from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, states here, quote, introduced species, non-native species, which have become established in a new location, have increasingly been recognized as a concern as they have become more prevalent in marine and terrestrial ecosystems. References cited. The ability to introduce species to alter population, community, and ecosystem structure and function, as well as cause significant economic damage, is well documented. A whole bunch of references. The annual economic costs incurring from managing the approximately 50,000 entry species in the United States, again, this is terrestrial and aquatic, both salt and fresh, alone are estimated to be over $120 billion. What I mentioned last week on another dock, which is being requested going from permanent or seasonal to permanent, is our understanding of the effect of exotics on ecosystem structure is not nearly as well known in our aquatic ecosystems, in part because I think we breathe oxygen. We have a hard time working with breathing water. So our familiarity, we're always looking generally down and through. It is not part of our normal environment. A little bit further on in this 2013 survey, same first page. This is talking about floating docks and piers because these structures are, of course, accessible regardless of the tidal cycle. Another reason, this is in quote, another reason for sampling floating docks and other floating structures is that marine introduced species are often found to be more prevalent on artificial surfaces than natural surfaces. Again, it gives a list of references for that. In the summary of this 2013, the first sentence, introduced species represent a large component of the total fowling community. These are the animals that are growing on new surfaces. Even if they're treated, Arlene, I have seen plenty of growth on pilings that have been CCA treated after a period of time. Total fowling community from Maine to Rhode Island is up 31%. The number of introduced species have been steadily increasing within New England waters, and they give some information regarding that. Moving on to a Glaspie et al. Article, research peer-reviewed, non-indigenous biota on artificial surfaces. Could habitat creation facilitate biological invasions? This is in the record, something I've submitted. Introduction. Habitat destruction and introductions of non-indigenous species are believed to be two of the greatest threats to native biodiversity. Referencing following, couple sentences down. Simultaneously, estuarine habitats are becoming more urbanized, as you referenced, Arlene, in many instances creating hard surfaces in regions where none existed previously. Within our southern embayments, there's not a lot of native hard surfaces. Pilings, vertical pilings represent a unique environment in these areas, and so as has been documented in these continuing references, are more likely to be colonized by invasive species. So on the last page of this referenced article, prior to the references, something I've starred, habitats created by pontoons and pilings are likely to enhance the establishment of viable populations of epibiota, thereby making a successful invasion, again, in my words, into the surrounding ecosystems more probable, gives a reference there. Down to the second to last paragraph, pontoons and pilings therefore provide unique subtidal habitats that are poorly utilized by some native species. Moving on. This is a Bulleri and Airoldi. Again, this is from the Adriatic Sea. I'll just read the title of this. And Arlene, you said, yeah, it's from very far away. Title of this, Journal of Applied Ecology from 2005. Artificial marine structures facilitate the spread of non-indigenous green algae, Codium fragile and Tomentosudis in the North Adriatic Sea. I would like to remind, well, actually, I know I said this back in early 2000s. It's noted on this front page. Codium fragile is found in our coastal waters. So yes, this is Adriatic Sea, but this species is an exotic within our waters and one which I'm fairly certain our state has a concern for, although I can't give that specific reference. Moving on to the third peer review article that I put into the record. This is by, again, Bulleri, and the second author is Chapman. The introduction of coastal infrastructure as a driver of change in marine environments. Again, the summary. Again, you can read the whole thing if you want, but in a peer-reviewed article, you can't put something in the summary that is not well argued, substantiated within the structure of methods and data collection. The second point in the summary. After the first two sentences, the provision of novel habitat, hard substrata, along sedimentary shores can alter local and regional biodiversity by modifying natural patterns of dispersal of species or by facilitating the establishment and spread of exotic species. Okay, so that is of the reference. I'm still going on. That is of the referenced peer-reviewed science, and I am not aware of any science changing our understanding as to the threat here of exotic species. I would like to bring more than just the last paragraph of our shellfish, town shellfish biology, Liz Lewis. So her 6th of January letter to us. On the second page, under additional comments, docks and piers, when placed in land containing shellfish or shellfish habitat, have an adverse impact on the resource area value. This is in quotations, because under Chapter 703 of our private docks and piers, town of Barnstable. This seems to me not up for debate, as it is in the town's regulations adopted by the Conservation Commission. And therefore, these adverse effects, unless proven otherwise, should be accepted as fact. On to her third page, top of that page. As much as pumping in and out of the pilings causes areas of disturbance and turbidity twice a year and localized liquidation of sediments, some of these habitats are able to recover. That's a very important point that I'll get to with personal experiences, both from biologist Lewis and from myself over this past weekend. Second to last paragraph. With the removal of the seasonal pier, it allows for commercial pumping activity to harvest the soft-shell clams and important access to the resource. If the permanent pilings were in place, commercial harvesters would have a challenging time harvesting this area that has been historically been valuable. And then Tom, you read that last paragraph. Okay. The final thing that I have put into the record is 3 doors to the north, 3 properties to the north is the Ryan Pier. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Arlene, I forgot to include what you put in, the 2018 Rapid Assessment Survey of introduced cryoptogenic and native marine species in New England mariners habitats, Maine, Massachusetts to Maine. On that second page that you gave us, the first 3 sites are from the Cape. The 4th site is Boston, and the last 4 sites are to the north. Boston and to the north are certainly of colder waters. And your assertion that cold waters do have a negative effect on some exotic organisms is valid. If you will note, and my fellow commissioners, I hope you're looking as well at this second page, or Arlene, I would like for you to disagree with me if you find my observations faulty, that the Cape, including Sandwich, including the Mass Maritime Academy, these are of waters similar to our 3 bays. In fact, they're even a little bit colder, I would argue. They are the most populated with invasive species. As you move further north, you have fewer. But our embayments are warmer than these 3 that have been sampled in the 2018 survey. So I would suggest that given your assertion that warm waters are not good for the annual die-off of invasive species, that our embayments actually represent a worse environment than what you presented in the 2018 survey, which you've included. So I will be making reference to the Ryan court case in my personal observations, which I will read into the record now. Let me take a sip of water. Okay. So this Martin Pier, I think, and you can correct me, Arlene, if this is false, borders a shellfish grant to the south. How close is that shellfish grant to this pier?
We haven't been able to actually measure it, partly because the area is only defined in town records with GPS coordinates. The site as it is used by Katuitt Oyster provides more than sufficient distance between the array of shellfish bags and the pier. I think Mr. Gargiulo, the owner of Katuitt Oyster, is on the call. I don't want to put him in a bad position, but my understanding is that the pier location and use have coexisted with the grant without significant interference over time.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but it is in close proximity. It's just right to the south of it, right? It's in the neighboring, so we say, waterfront property. It's just right off of that.
That's correct. It's close by.
Okay, so let me bring into our discussion. I suggest these are facts. A year-round set of pilings would impede the off-season boat water sheet use for both fin fishing and or for bull raking of hardshell clams. This area is generally greater than 2 feet deep at mean low, which gives plenty of depth between a mean and high tide for these two activities, fin fishing out of a boat and or bull raking. Again, I want to thank you for both having Tyrell and Byers' paper along with the 218 rapid assessment survey, pilings as a substrate for invasive species. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. I put into the record Diodati's letter. I put into the record the 2013 rapid assessment survey. Our town's shellfish biologist Lewis, is professionally trained and personally familiar with much of the coastal waters here in our town. She has provided evidence of a healthy population of both soft and hard shell clams at this site. Additionally, she instructs us as commissioners that our very own regulations state that docks and piers have an adverse effect on shellfish and shell fishing unless proven otherwise. Permanent piles remove habitat, remove surface habitat, and has been referenced by, I think, biologist Lewis, alter the local hydrography. And so the sediment in close proximity to those dock pilings. Diodati made reference to ice gouging. Ms. Lewis notes with references cited that piles slow down water transit with concomitant alteration of surficial sediments, chemistry potentially becoming less attractive for larval bivalve settlement. Ms. Lewis personally walked along the axis of this temporary pier, and though she was able to locate as slight depressions in surface topography the areas of extracted 4x4 piles, she did not find these past post holes to be soft, unsuitable to shellfish sediment. I would like to include into the record my personal observations this past Sunday morning, just after a full moon low tide near dawn at a dock 3 houses to the north, the Ryan Pier. Similar to the Martins, the Ryans had a long permitted seasonal pier, which is being requested to be changed into a permanent pier about 7 years ago. Based on the evidence that was provided during our Conservation Commission hearings of a permanent pier, impeding seasonal water sheet use, providing invasive species colonization on the artificial surfaces of the pilings, and lost degradation of shellfish habitats, Judge Rufo of the Superior Court upheld Conservation Commission's decision to deny the change from a seasonal to a permanent pile-based dock. That decision, again, has been entered in the record. Back to my Sunday morning visit down to the Ryan Pier. I'm using the Ryan Pier, 3 properties away again from the Martin application for us, because of my pre-existing familiarity in the history and Judge Rufo's decision on an almost identical request of a seasonal to permanent change in that dock. I brought with me my waders and a standard 5-foot shellfish rake with basket. These were my visual observations. Given that the Ryan Seasonal Pier has had about 20 years of annual in-out pile placement, I search for that softer fluidized sediment holes or degraded sediment less conducive for shellfish that Ms. Wilson, you claim would be there. Well, I did find a couple of surface depressions, and that couple meaning 2, maximum 3. The sediment was firm and seemingly not vastly different. This was determined by my foot probing and clam raking from the sediment away from that pier axis. Interestingly, I found 2-inch topographical depressions well away from this dock axis. I don't know what caused them, but they were not that much different than what I was seeing from the previous season's post hole areas. Again, Ms. Lewis suggested that under certain sediment types, these post holes fill in with rather coarse sediment very quickly. The shellfish populations at the Ryan Axis Pier of soft shell, hard shell, and even an oyster that I caught, that I dug up, were previously right along the axis of the dock. So it seems that a seasonal dock was not that detrimental. I'm almost certain that seasonal removal of the piers was beneficial to the sea shellfish populations in the immediate vicinity of the Ryan Pier. The evidence herein presented by myself and on the record illustrates the following negative effects. 1, permanent piers exclude from the public the water sheet for public use. 2, permanent piers provide an artificial surface for the colonization by non-native species, and most importantly, refutes, and the third item here is, and most importantly, the evidence presented both by me at the Ryan Pier and Ms. Lewis at this Pier Martin Pier application refutes the argument that repeated 4-inch pile annual driving and removal results in habitat unsuitable for shellfish. My fellow commissioners, it is our duty to the citizens of our town to protect coastal nearshore habitat enjoyed by thousands of both recreational and commercial harvesters of finfish and shellfish. I strongly urge you all to deny this application of converting a seasonal pier into a permanent piling structure. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Pete. George?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'll be a little bit briefer, but thanks, Pete, for all that information. I would like to just briefly speak to some of my personal experience. So in 40 years of working around the 3 Bay area and putting in CCA piling, yes, there certainly has been an increase in exotics over the last 15 years. Absolutely no doubt about it. We found that to be particularly true on the floating structures, floats, that we would haul out every fall and put back in every spring. Again, those exotics would die over the winter. You'd scrape them off in the spring and you put the floats back in. In my experience, Pete, I've never seen exotics growing on CCA piles in the 3 Bay area. Maybe it's there. I've just never seen it. So that's number one. The second thing I would like to say is same thing I said for the last one. I've always been a proponent of permanent piles as opposed to the 4x4s going in and out twice a year. I think it does a lot more damage to jet those piles in and out every fall and every spring than putting a permanent pile in place one time. Also, I've seen many commercial shellfish underneath those permanent piers that we put in, all throughout all the years. So just some personal observation. Thank you.
Okay, can I actually have a little bit of sort of a input here with you, George? Now,
Sure.
you've got a long history of actually making a living putting in docks, right?
Yes.
Have you walked along the bottom out to, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet deep at low tide and done any inspection of the sediment prior to you putting in these pilings, be they permanent or temporary?
Almost every dock.
And do you have a background? I don't even. I can't at this point, unless I go to a microscope with really very instructive keys, I cannot identify at this point, even with my background, my professional background, having written papers in peer-reviewed science articles of macrobenthic organisms. I cannot identify native versus non-native exotics in every case. Do you have that experience? Do you have
No, but I can identify, you know, the major ones are the squirts, what we call squirts. And those are the ones that grow on the floats, on the horizontal structures.
Okay.
I have never seen a squirt on a piling.
How about codium?
I don't know, Pete. I'm not versed in that, and you probably are way better than I. I'm just saying, from what I see on CCA piles, they are clean with maybe some exception of a few barnacles here and there. That's just my observation.
Okay.
And I'm not a scientist, just an observer who's been on the water.
So with CCA pilings, how long does this anti-fouling poison leach out and essentially retard fouling organisms?
I'm not sure what causes the retarding of these organisms.
It's toxicity.
They're listed by the state as a non-leach. CCA is a non-leaching. That's by the state. It's approved by the state. We don't use creosote anymore because creosote did leach into the waters. CCA is a non-leaching treatment. I know there's different papers on that have different opinions. But I can tell you that in the 30 years that I put CCA piling in, I've also taken CCA piling out that had been in the water for 30 years. And other than a few barnacles, they've got nothing on them. So,
because certainly at the Ryan Pier, just 3 up, when I went out back in 2017 and did a visual observation, those 4 permanent piles, which again, the Martin Pier has these, but I chose to work with the Ryan Pier just 150 yards up. Those 4 piles had prodigious fouling community on them. And it was in the fall, I think, that I went to see them. So by contrast, I have seen very active growth on these large piles. And I assumed the Ryan Pier was CCA, but I don't know.
And was that exotic growth or?
Again, I don't have the taxonomic understanding to do that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bill?
Well, this is all about seasonal versus permanent. And I'm trying to figure it out. And I would like to start by reading the first sentence of our dock and pier bylaw, 703-5B. And it says, quote, "In most cases, seasonal piers present less impact to the resource because of their seasonal nature and because they can be constructed entirely with environmentally benign materials." And so, you know, this business of CCA, chromated copper arsenate, our bylaw, again, the dock and pier bylaw, says only non-CCA material may be used in the construction of the dock. But then it notes that if you have a structural timber 3 inches or more in thickness, you can continue to use the CCA treated timber on a really large timber until such time as the commission determines that suitable alternatives exist. well, I haven't been around long enough to know what that discussion has been here, but the idea that you are infusing a timber less than 3 inches, and that's bad, and we're outlawing that in our ordinance, but that if it's bigger than 3 inches, well, that's okay. And I'm like going, what's with chromated copper arsenate? And I have not, gone into the literature to figure out what are the effects of chromated copper arsenate, but it sounds like not a good product to be putting into our marine system, but we're doing that, and we can if it's bigger than a 3-inch diameter. So, I'm just thinking, well, what are we doing when we're using those things? I know that peers are going to promote invasive species. Possibly the CCA treated stuff, the poison, is limiting that, but overall, you're going to have an increase in artificial surfaces, and those are vulnerable to invasive species. And I actually went to, and I thank Arlene and Pete for that long-winded discussion last week. And in preparation, I went and I read some of these reports, and it's a fact that, in fact, if you have artificial surfaces, they will be colonized disproportionately by marine invasives. And so, therefore, if we're going with a permanent dock, you are probably promoting invasive species proliferation. We talk about cumulative impacts. And I think, one dock, we got 6 docks and they're all with invasives, but maybe there is a point where we want to consider the cumulative impacts of permanent docks as it promotes invasive species proliferation. And another thought is that access to shell fishing. George suggested that, he's not seeing that to be an issue. Docks, as a recreational shell fishing person, I have found that docks can actually interfere. When you're in your waders and you're trying to get under the dock, that's basically hard to do sometimes. You're going to fill up your waders when you bend over when you got the rake or whatever. So I'm like thinking, I do believe that access to shell fishing persons, commercial or recreational, I can't help but think that there's going to be an effect, and that the access to shell fishing is something covered by our bylaw. I'm also, I'm listening to Liz Lewis, our town shellfish resource specialist, who seems to be recommending that we reject this and other projects that want to go from seasonal to permanent. And I'm thinking, well, she must know what she's talking about. We have not heard from the Shellfish Committee on this project, which is comprised of both recreational shell fishing persons as well as commercial. We haven't heard from that. Certainly would want to know about that. And then my last comment is that Arlene brought up the whole idea of turbidity. Whoa, look out, bad turbidity. And it's in our regs, and we're talking and concerned about turbidity. And yet, yes, of course we're concerned about turbidity. Our pier and dock bylaw makes a big deal about it, but it also makes a big deal about the effects of boats and why we need to have certain depths for docks. That's where the turbidity becomes, really important. And I'm not so sure that a temporary dock, putting it in, taking out, is going to make that much difference in terms of turbidity. And so I'm like, I can't help but think that I'm inclined to say that we should perhaps really stick to our guns and go along and consider seasonal dock superior to permanent docks. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I just want to mention this stretch of the coastline in terms of the shellfish rating is 10. And I know, Arlene kind of mentioned, that's the latest one. But in Tom McCarty's shellfish report, is kind of mentioning that the recreational and commercial shellfishermen have traditionally harvested significant amount of shellfish from this area. So I just wanted to point that out. This area has been a significant shellfish habitat stuff. Larry.
Thank you, Tom. I'm the only contribution that I made prior to the hearing was sending in 2 photos that I took last Sunday. I think it was Sunday. And they're just pictures of what appears to be the wooden pier that was there, the seasonal pier that's up somehow on a hoist. Darcy's got the picture if she cares to put it up. Those of you that went there saw it. And one of the things I chose not to do was to walk down the stone steps. I thought that my own agility is not something I should be testing. That being said, my focus is on some of the words of 703. I'm not going to interject myself on science, not because I don't have some idea about it, but I don't see why I should be attempting to try to deviate or interrupt what Arlene and Pete and to even extent Bill have interjected. I don't need to be a scientist at this stage of my life. However, the word turbidity shows up in the preamble under 703-1D, and it basically says, and this goes back probably to thank you, Arlene, for Darcy for putting the picture up. That to me looks like a lot of wood that's been around for a number of years. And it's interesting if you look out, I presume that those 2 vertical posts are where the pier takes a bent and then goes further into the water. Any event, we're looking at the turbulence is caused by jet drive. That's the boats and jet skis, I take it, not the putting in the taking out of the seasonal. High turbidity is talked about levels, attenuate light, so forth, sediments. That is part of the turbidity definition in that particular section. There is little, if any, discussion in the original version of this reg, which was 2006, which was 3 years subsequent to the permitting of this pier. Thank you. The question is whether or not, let me go back here. Turbidity, and George, I'd like you to chime in on this when you have the chance. Is there any evidentiary difference between turbidity for a seasonal pier, not just by the removal of it twice a year, but also by the activity around it, and versus the permanent pier, where there is no replacing it, and then you're dealing with more stable conditions or less disruptive conditions other than the flow of water around permanent piers in part of the year. So I'm very much in line with George's thinking, and have been for quite some time. But on the other hand, I want to listen to different views, and I want to understand them better and respect them. But in this particular case, there is no evidence or even a suggestion that this particular pier, if it's made permanent, is suddenly going to create more turbidity. It's reasonable to expect that this pier is going, as a permanent pier, it would be different. How different would it be? Would it be different in a bad sense? I don't think there's any evidence to say it's going to be bad or better. I think it's just a question of what are the most important factors here. This is a pretty substantial expanse of water across there. I don't know how many feet it is or yards it is, but I think this picture that's on the screen now shows pretty much where the Ryan Pier is located. So it's pretty far away. It's also near the relay area at Cordwood, and it's near a different structure as to piers and oystering and so forth. The Continued Oyster Company has two primary positions over there. And on this side of the waterway, left and right, there's permanent piers. So I think that we don't have the dates of those piers. We don't have any history on them. But it clearly appears that other permanent piers have been installed following hearings and permits. The dates can vary because times change. But those are my comments for the moment. I don't know whether this will be continued or not, but I will reserve the presentation of a more in-depth article, discussion rather, examining 703 and Chapter 237. There's certain provisions in there that are very, very generalized, and I want to see if any of them touch on what we've been talking about today. I haven't arrived at that yet. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. John?
Thank you. I'm not quite sure, Larry, where you were going, so I apologize if I'm confused by your comments, but a couple of things that first, Arlene, a question. What kind of craft has been moored or tied up to this pier?
Presently, it's a non-motorized dock. It will remain that way. We are not asking for a change in the boat use.
Okay, so it's non-motorized. Couple of things that bother me, Arlene, what you said is that, first of all, you quoted the regulations, and you did, as somebody else pointed out, left out the specific language in the regulation of the commission's preference to seasonal docks, and that was based on a lot of evidence from Tom Marcotti as we wrote these regulations. So, secondly, you also challenged the commission's right to look at shellfish habitat versus shellfish. And I think Pete adequately and emphatically pointed out that you cannot, in fact, at least in my opinion, differentiate between the commission's authority to look at shellfish and the habitat that supports shellfish. I mean, that to me would be an illogical position. So I kind of challenge you on that, be honest with you. Thirdly, as I looked at Liz's letter, I was impressed by her fact that she was differentiating this specifically, and we are site specific, of course. She was differentiating this because her evidence, and based on what Peter saw, in fact, these holes have been filled to a substantial degree. So that sort of takes away from the argument that the annual removal of these things and replacement of them is causing these holes and creating turbidity. So I'm impressed with the fact that on a site-specific basis, we're looking at a different situation here than we may have been looking at in other locations. All in all, I'm also swayed by George's experience because, you know, hands-on 40 years, that's why he's got gray hair. I mean, the fact is that experience is worth listening to a large degree, but as is Peter's scientific testimony about the impact of having permanent piles on growth in the water. I happen to have a permanent dock, and the piles, of course, are permanent. They're 12-inch piles. They've been in for, golly, a long time. And I have to say, I look at those things, and I do see a lot of growth on them. Whether they are indigenous kinds of things, Peter, or exotic, I have no idea. But there clearly is growth on them. And again, I suspect because after so many years, the CCA just wears off of those things. So it does allow growth. On balance, I must say I come out on this very site-specific basis case based on Ms. Lewis's recommendations, to say that we are better off staying with the seasonal pier rather than going to permanent on this specific location.
Thank you, John. George, you raise your hand.
Yeah, just one last comment, and I'll put it all to bed. It's important that, yes, that maybe in this specific site with the jetting, the holes filled in with some structurally more sound material, if you will. My point is that when you're jetting those piles in the spring, those 4x4s, you're taking away habitat in the spring when spat is when they're doing their thing. You're also jetting them out in the fall, and you're exposing whatever shellfish might be there to predators. So my feeling is doing that year in, year out is really not good. I'd rather see the permanent pile in place one time. So it's not so much the turbidity, it's not so much that you displace the material and fines fall in that hole and you have a hole. That does happen in certain areas, probably not so much in this area. My problem with here is that you're disturbing that ground twice a year in particularly vulnerable times. And I think it's better just to put the piling in once and be done with it. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Any other comments from the commissioner? None. Let me go to the public comment. I saw Amy is on the line. Amy, do you want to make any comment?
Hi, thank you for having me. Amy Croto, Shellfish Constable. I would just like to sort of, I guess, argue Mr. Gilmore's point. I do agree that seasonal piers are preferential to permanent piers. You're permanently removing shellfish habitat when you put in a permanent pier. And we do see constantly as we are out in the intertidal, I cannot speak to whether or not they are native or non-native species, but we do see a buildup of other flora on these piers that are permanently installed. I don't think that it's necessary in this situation to go with a permanent pier. And I do think that it will set a precedent for every other seasonal pier that is within this town to eventually become a permanent pier.
Thank you. Who else is?
Chris Argello.
Chris.
Hi there. How are you? Just a couple of comments. You know, this area obviously is right adjacent to the shellfish grant that we leased from the town. And in the 20 years that I've been working over there, you know, obviously it's been used quite a bit by the commercial shell fishermen. All season long, all year round, basically, whether it's pumping soft shell clams, digging quahogs, it's used both commercially and recreationally year round. I've seen that and seen what gets harvested out of that area. It's my recollection of it is that it was categorized as a category 8 shellfish habitat in that entire shoreline, which is the highest rating. And forgive me for not knowing all the current regulations, but I was under the impression that just that alone would really prevent anything permanent from being constructed there in that area. But that's one part that kind of stood out to me as a flag. That really my biggest concern with this project or proposal is that, again, it's just going to set the precedent for the next door neighbor up and down that shoreline to want to build a permanent pier or convert a temporary seasonal pier into a permanent pier. That's really my biggest concern with this project. One quick note on the fouling organisms. I know that seems to be a hot topic. you all know that there's been all sorts of research done. I know Diane Murphy with the extension has really dug in with some of the new species that are being seen, but actually some of them are just old and have become more prolific. But they definitely, you do have, we'll call them what you want, but different types of tunicates, squirts, et cetera, corals that grow on these pilings. How much of a detriment, you know, and how, whether or not they're invasive or non-native, I don't know all the science behind each species, but, you know, I've certainly seen enough of the pilings in the area, whether in the Narrows or close by to that proposal, that I've seen them firsthand. And, you know, it's for me, it's, again, I think you're going to really, if this were to go through, I think that you're really opening the door for a whole bunch of proposals for conversions, and I'm just not in favor of that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Chris. Pete?
Yeah, Chris, I have a question. You being a man on the water and involved in this resource as a living. Again, I can't tell the difference without a bunch of review in my past history, exotic versus natives. But over the years that you have been shellfishing, shellfishermen, commercially raising shellfish, have you noticed any increase in the amount of fouling that occurs on your structures that may or may not be native and or exotic? And does it cost you time and labor to keep those things clean?
Well, part of the reason we converted to floating equipment over there was because of the fouling. And, you know, fouling is certainly an issue on our dock, which is directly across the bay. We have to scrape that every year. There's definitely, you know, again, that's just in the time that I've been there. I mean, that's been an annual thing for us for as long as I've been there. But I do feel like you have different species of fouling organisms that, you know, right now in particular, and I'm sure you may or may not have heard of it, but there is one called, you know, that Diane referenced called Crinalia, which is a sponge that was traced back, you know, to this area native into the 1800s and documented in the 60s. But now it's prolific through the entire Narrows Channel into North Bay and abutting right where what you were calling the Ryan Pier, which is now the Mullen property, which is on the left there. But so we do have quite a bit of fouling organisms that grow in that area. You know, whether or not the piers themselves will contribute to the problem, I don't know the science behind that, but they are definitely there. I mean, it's just go out and go take a look around and you'll see it firsthand.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Channel 18, any more public comment on this?
I don't believe so, but if anyone else is here, now is your time to speak.
Excuse me, Tom, is Kim all set with the address and for his grant and all that information for Chris?
Yes, if you'd like to give it to me, that would be wonderful. Is there an address for the grant?
Well, you can send an emailing to P.O. Box 563, 26 Little River Road in Katuitt.
26 Little River Road is where the shed is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just wanted to have it on record that you're speaking on behalf of Cape Cod Oyster. That's just so it's in the record.
It's Katuitt Oyster.
Or I'm sorry, Katuitt Oyster,
That's all right.
sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Amy?
I can also very easily provide to Kim tomorrow the exact location of this specific grant from our GIS tool, if need be.
Yes, please. Tomorrow.
Thank you, Amy.
Tom, are you ready for
Who was that? So, assuming there's no more public comment on this, I just want to lay it out I think ultimately when we trying to vote on this, I think we may have to do the bifurcated, whether going the state and the local regulation per se.
Excuse me, Tom.
What?
I'd like an opportunity to respond to some of this, if I may.
Sure.
I'll try and be quick. I know it looks like some of you are falling asleep on the switch here, and I don't blame you. So the issue of artificial substrate, if you read through all these reports, artificial refers to things like plastics and metals and rubbers, not to native materials like wood or shell. And the use of wood pilings in this area, much more prevalent than things like PVC coated concrete, which there was a brief period when Falmouth thought those were wonderful. I don't think it's lasted very long. In the south, those are used, but up here where we have ice, the PVC tends to crack and the concrete doesn't hold up very well. So we use wood. Wood is considered to be a native material. All the sites sampled in the rapid assessment reviews, Pete cited the one from 2013. I've cited the one from 2018. Those sites are in what are called urbanized harbors. The Sandwich site and the Sandwich Marina is chock-a-block full. It looks like the Oyster Harbors Marine that most of you are probably more familiar with. Piers, dozens and dozens of piers right up against one another. They also looked at the Mass Maritime site, which not only is a dense site, but has international shipping, if you will, boats that empty bilge water that comes from foreign locations. Just looking at the aerial photograph and scaling off of that, Chris's floating bags look to be 80 to 85 feet away from this pier. Nothing against Pete's personal observations of the Ryan location. I think they're rather interesting myself, but they're not site specific. Could have gone to look at this site and done the same thing, but didn't. Let's see if we can do fairly quickly. CCA, Bill had some questions about the use of CCA. It continues to be the most recently approved EPA product, not that EPA always, that their imprimatur is always the be all and end all, but that's where it comes from. That's why the state still allows its use on piles. The commission, I believe, when they looked at using it on piles, but not on small pieces of the pier construction, was partly concerned about the fact that the CCA treated planking and supports tend to be cut on site so that they're the right size and the right number. And the sawdust carries the CCA. It can be blown for some distance. It's fairly light and winds up in places you would prefer it not to be. So I think that's where some of that regulatory language comes from. I will tell you, we talked about how I get to read these reports last week on another project. And interestingly enough, my invertebrate zoology training in college, which I will admit is a long time ago and getting to be longer every minute, we did our field work in Dennis and looked at piles and floats in a Dennis location, the upper reaches of the Bass River, actually. And the tunicates that we observed at that particular time, sea squirts and sea cucumbers, were predominantly located on the float, which was plastic, styrofoam, metal, and rubber. Not very much on the piles themselves. And so we collected animals off of the floats. That continues to be the case that's cited in the rapid assessment reports and some of the other local studies. In terms of harvesting, these piers are 4 feet wide. You can, with a rake, easily reach under at least the midline from these things on either side. And so you can, in fact, harvest all the way around a permanent pier. Turbidity, as George reminded us, and I believe that I have done the same, the impacts of the jetting occur predominantly in times that are critical in the life cycle of shellfish. They happen in the early spring when larvae are setting, and so they blow them all away from the location of these holes. And the turbidity in the water, depending on how long it stays in the water, I agree, Pete, can act to smother the shellfish larvae as well. So that's a problem. And what happens is that the sites really don't stabilize because you're working on them in the spring when the shellfish are setting and in the fall when they're growing. And so anything that settles in the area after the seasonal piers are in place gets disturbed again in the fall. And anything that's managed to make it through the winter gets disturbed in the spring. So they're critical periods of time. And that's why putting in a permanent piling where you're more apt to be able to contain the problem with silk curtains in the first instance, and then the piles are there and the area around them actually does stabilize is more important. I think, Larry, your pictures are beautiful. I'm going to come and take lessons from you. But the 2 small stakes that are beyond the piles that show in those photographs, I believe are winter stakes for moorings. The piles are the location where the float goes. That's the end of the pier. Again, we have not asked for a change in the boat use. It's a non-motorized dock. And so the turbidity impacts associated with boating activities for the pier are considerably less than they might be otherwise.
Aline,
I guess that's it.
Darcy has a question in terms of what depth do you need for your kayak?
What depth do we need for the kayak? I think the issue is that he has a small sailboat that he uses there occasionally as well. There's a little better than 2 feet at the end of the pier. And that's what's been there for almost 20 years, I guess. We want to continue to maintain that.
Okay. Let me go quickly back to, Pete and Bill and Luis, and then we can try to close this out. Pete?
Okay, so I teach chemistry in high school. And while I have a biological oceanography degree, I've always gotten paid because I can teach chemistry. And all my jobs from the university level down now to Sturgis. Chromium, in the chromium copper arsenate. So chromium is a toxic metal, even to human beings. It's not good. Now, yes, it's supposed to not leach out very fast from pilings, but the reason why we have it in pilings is because it's toxic to things that try to settle on it. And over time, it will leak out like it does from any piece of wood. It is not bound chemically into the wood cellulose. It is essentially injected into a form which is not very soluble. Copper, the second part of the CCA acronym. Copper doesn't bother us too much, but it is very toxic to aquatic things. So it does a very good job of, keeping epibiota from settling on it. Finally, arsenate. You said arsenate because it has some oxygens, I think, associated with the arsenic itself. I think all of you know the arsenic and old lace tales from the end of the 1800s. It's toxic to human beings. It's toxic to many forms of life. That's why it is in this wood. So Arlene, when you make a mention that CCA in wood is a native material, well, I disagree with that. It most certainly is not. Wood treated CCA native material. Secondly, with the rapid assessment surveys, yes, I agree. They're primarily associated with a larger concentration of piers and docks. So I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners, and you as well, Arlene, do you think you could actually convince our state to recommend that they visit some private docks to either collect information that either supports, provides evidence that exotics are not a problem? That's not going to happen by our state. They choose areas that are easy to access, and that's the reason why they're choosing them. But it is the same water. And these individuals, these species, these exotic species travel by large dispersal at larval states of water. Finally, I want to remind something that George told us, the turbidity associated with the driving of piles in a sedimentary environment like the Marstons or like the Hyannis along this whole shore is turbidity on the time scale of a day, maximum 2 days. Larval mollusks can both settle and move into the water column on a period of a couple of weeks during this time period. So the turbidity associated with a day or two of jetting in these would have, in my professional opinion, no impact on larval settlement. And George, you might be able to tell me how, if you're pulling posts out, do you actually jet them to pull them out, or do you just apply some kind of forceful up pressure and you pull them up out of the sediment? How is that done, George?
Yeah, most often they're pulled out with a winch. They're winched out, but oftentimes they'll jet them at the same time just to make it easier.
And again, here in the fall, is the turbidity associated with this on a time scale of a day, 2 days, a week, or a month?
Yeah, again, depends on the site specific, but if it's if it's a silty sediment area, it's going to be a lot longer than.
And this is not a silty area, so let's apply it to this site.
Right.
A day or two?
Oh yeah, max.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Let's go to Bill. Louise,
could I answer Pete's questions?
No, let's finish this one, and then I can come back to you and have a quick reply. Okay. Bill?
Yeah, just very briefly, pier pilings are artificial. Wood or not, they are not a natural feature of our estuaries. I mean, that's just not, they're not natural. And in the greater, I don't know what you call it, the greater realm of invasive species management, invasive species colonize disturbed habitats. And for example, on roadsides, you talk about invasive plants, disturbed habitats where you get rid of the native fauna and you end up having all kinds of strange invasive species that colonize that. And so therefore, a wooden pier that just shows up in the water is clearly an artificial substrate. It is not a natural substrate. That's one point. And the other point is that it sounds like CCA sawdust is a really nasty product, as you suggested, Arlene. The only other thing I would add is that when Pete was talking about chromated copper arsenate, all pretty heavy duty chemicals, yeah, copper's not a problem. And as a retired fisheries biologist, PhD level, blah, blah, copper is so toxic. It has incredible impacts on salmon migration. And I can't remember. I mean, it'd be going back 20 years in my memory, and I don't remember the concentration, but it is like 1 part per trillion or something can really throw off migration. And don't quote me on the 1 part per trillion. I can't, but it's really, really unimaginably low concentrations of copper can really tamper with homing migration in salmon. Not that we have salmon there, but again, what is the impact of low levels of copper and what it might be doing to our aquatic organisms?
Thanks, Bill. Louise?
Arlene, a couple of times just this evening and maybe even when we were discussing that recent previous application, you've talked about how the turbidity that occurs in the spring and the fall, although transient, will affect what's going on in terms of the reproduction of shellfish. Is there any data that indicates that areas where the piers are installed in the spring and removed in the fall, that the shellfish communities have been affected in terms of populations? I mean, is this just kind of conjecture?
Tom, is it all right if I respond to these things now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think there have been studies, Louise, I don't have them at my fingertips. They were available to the commission early on when it wrote the original pier regs. And I know that there were a couple of seminars, I think either by DEP Wetlands or CZM sponsored, probably back in the late 1990s on that topic. And I can search for some stuff for you. But
you don't have
looking
data that
so it's not just conjecture based.
Right. Well, how about is there any evidence in areas of seasonal piers that the shellfish population has decreased? Maybe Amy could speak to that. There
is evidence that the shellfish populations have decreased broadly over time. A lot of that is related to the disappearance of eelgrass.
I'm thinking of related to the installation and pulling out of seasonal docks.
Piers. Actually, when we've had shellfish studies done, we often look at the adjacent piers if we can get permission to do that. We did it for instance, on the Wheelo Pier, and Pam Newbert has done it on other studies for other people besides my office. Her opinion is that permanent piers by themselves have little impact on shellfish populations in the area.
No, that's not my question. My question is the turbidity created. You've made the case. You suggested more than once, even this evening, that the act of installing in the spring and pulling out in the fall creates turbidity at just the wrong time for the viability of breeding of shellfish and what's going on in the fall. So that to me suggests that you're making a case that the activity around seasonal piers is deleterious to shellfish. I'm assuming that's the extension of what you're saying. So, you know, the situation where you just mentioned Dr. Newberger's opinion, I'm wondering what she thinks about what's happening around the seasonal piers, not the permanent piers.
That I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, let me see. I guess I should have spoken up before, but when I made the site visit, I think we can see the Ryan Pier from where we're standing, looking down on the area where you're making an application, right? As you stand there, you can look to the right, and I believe that's the Ryan Pier.
Again, I'm not sure. I know it's quite close by.
Yeah, it is. And I remember several years ago when the Ryan Pier came up and we wrung our hands about it, just as we are this evening. I agree with George. It would be really nice just to put the pier in and forget it. However, I worry, just as I did back when we talked about the Ryan Pier, about the CCA in an area that is one of our very best in the town shellfish areas. I worry about that. When I hear about the turbidity that is created in the installation and pulling out of a seasonal pier, and I think about the turbidity that happens when there is boat activity, I say to myself, unless it's really affecting the multiplication of shellfish, it's really the boats that are going to be the major factor in terms of creating turbidity. I worry a lot about the precedent that's being set. And I know that there are a lot of seasonal docks around town that all of a sudden I fear are going to be coming forward to suddenly become permanent. So, you know, as I wring my hands about this and I go back and forth. Oh, the other thing is, I can't imagine that the presence of a pier is not going to create some sort of barrier to shellfishing. I mean, it's there, yeah, you can get your rake under there, but it is a barrier. You just, it's there. So those are the things that I am concerned about. And yes, I think it would be nice to be able to put it in and forget it, but there are just too many issues that I feel are there on the other side of the coin.
Thank you, Louise. Amy, do you want to say something?
I would, thank you. Just a couple of things. I would like to just mention the fact that a motorized vessel has been on this dock for years. And so I'm not exactly sure why we're talking about non-motorized vessel. And in addition, I think at this point, like quoting stuff from the 90s to speak to what things can be present in our water bodies now is a bit ridiculous. It doesn't account for climate change. It doesn't account for the fact that our bays have degraded. And the fact that this place still, in spite of having, whether you like them or don't, seasonal piers, is good habitat for recruitment and settlement of shellfish, is important and should be preserved.
Thank you, Amy. Linda, to make the comment, and then I just want to close. I just want to close, and you know, not close, because in a sense, I think we do a finding, you know, and I would probably take it under the advisement, but so as we know. So I didn't go ahead.
Very quickly, Pete had asked again about how long it takes to put the piers in and take them out versus the prime time for larval setting for shellfish. So if it takes 2 days and the setting time, prime setting time is 2 weeks, that's 14% of the time period that is impacted. And that can be a significant amount. In terms of materials versus structures, Bill mentioned that piles themselves are not a native obstruction, if you will, to the waterway. But the reports don't talk about how the material is used necessarily. They talk about what the material is, and wood, in fact, is a native material. There is an alternative to CCA treatment. The Conservation Commission here for a while, again, not very long, looked more favorably on salt-treated oak piles. And George is shaking his head. They're hard to get, they're expensive, and in terms of alternatives, the impacts difference is probably minimal. The other alternative, of course, is tropical woods, and that depends on whether you approve of harvesting tropical woods from the rainforest, but that is also an alternative that can be used instead of CCA should the Conservation Commission decide that they don't want us to use CCA. Harvesting, shellfish is not a protected interest under the Wetlands Act. I know everyone will jump down my throat for saying that, but it is the case. It's the animals and the habitat, depending on which regulation you're looking at. That's the issue. I would also ask the commission to think carefully about the number of piers that with permanent pilings that it's approved since the Ryan Pier in 2009. I know some of them are not in areas that are very high shellfish production, but a lot of them are in decent to good shellfish production areas. And the fact that you are going to now deny someone the right to have a permanent piles pier when the regulations haven't changed could be construed as being arbitrary and capricious. If you want to decide that you really hate pile supported piers in areas with shellfish rankings of a specific number, then you need to change your regulations to make that make it something that everybody is aware of upfront before you embark on these things. I guess that's all I've got right now.
Thank you. So for this application, I think we need to do a finding one way or the other, in the sense that what I want to do is to pull the commission on which way that we're going. If we are going to vote yes, that means that we're going to approve the piers to change from a seasonal to a permanent. If it is a no, that means we are not approving this application and keep the pier as a seasonal.
But Tom, is there a deadline? Is there a timing issue if you take this under advisement?
If I'm taking this under the advisement, I'll bring it back on the 17th.
Does that meet our 21-day deadline?
Yes.
We're absolutely sure of that. Okay.
Yes, and absolute. I checked.
Because I do think that you're right. Any decision should be bifurcated between state and town ordinance.
Right. So I'd like to pull the commissioner before the next steps. George?
Okay, poll commissioners. Abadili.
I would vote yes under state law. I would vote no under the town ordinance.
No. Foster.
I would vote yes under state and no under town.
Gilmore. I would vote yes under the state, and I would vote yes under the town. Hearn.
I would vote the same way John Abadili would,
Yes
has
and no.
stated. Yes, and then no.
Lee.
Yes for the state and no for the local.
Moran.
Yes as to state, yes as to local, just like you.
Sampu.
I will take the advice of my lawyer friend and say yes on the state and no on our local.
So it's a unanimous under the state, and it is 5 to 2 in favor of no under the local.
So what I'd like to do though is to take this under the advisement, coming back on the 17th to go through the finding, and I'd like to work with Pete to draft the finding.
Fine with me.
I make a motion to take the matter under advisement, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
To close the public hearing and take it under advisement.
Yes,
Until the 17th, correct?
We close the public comments, and then we're taking this under the advisement and come back on the 17th to go over the findings.
Okay, so Abadili.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Moran.
No.
Sampu.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Abadili.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Moran.
Aye.
Sampu.
Aye.
That's unanimous. We are adjourned at 6:09.